My husband looked at me across the kitchen table one Saturday morning in November and said, "You've been draining this family for 41 years. From now on, you pay your own way." I was holding my coffee mug. I didn't put it down. I just looked at him. Then I said, "Okay." He seemed surprised. He had expected crying, maybe. Or an argument. That was what he usually got in the early years. But I was 63 years old and I had cried myself dry 20 years ago, so I just said okay, and I took a sip of my coffee and I looked out the window at the birch trees in the backyard and I thought, fine. His name is Roy. We met in Saskatoon in 1981 when I was 22 and he was 24, and we were both working summer jobs at a grain elevator outside the city. He was funny back then. He made me laugh constantly. He had this way of tilting his head when he was thinking, like a dog hearing a strange sound, and I thought it was charming. I married him at St. Paul's United Church on a February afternoon with a wind chill of -38 and thought I was the luckiest woman alive. For the first few years, things were fine. We both worked. We split things more or less evenly, though I don't think either of us was counting. Then our daughter was born, and our son 2 years after that, and somewhere in that stretch of sleepless nights and daycare forms and hockey schedules and parent-teacher interviews, the division of labor shifted. I'm not sure when it happened exactly. It was like water pooling in a low spot. You don't notice until it's already there. I went part-time at the accounting firm where I worked so I could pick the kids up from school. Roy got a promotion and started traveling more for work. I handled the groceries, the cooking, the children's doctor appointments, the dentist, the school fundraisers, the birthday parties, the Christmas shopping, the thank you cards. Roy handled the lawn in summer and the snowblower in winter. He was good at the snowblower. I went back to full-time work when our son started grade 7. By then, I had been doing the full household management for so long that it simply continued. Roy had no idea what size shoes the kids wore. He didn't know which child was allergic to penicillin. He had never once bought a birthday present for either of his parents without me reminding him, writing the card out, addressing the envelope, and leaving the whole package on the kitchen counter with a sticky note that said, "Mail this." I don't say this to be cruel, it's just what happened. The money thing started about 10 years into our marriage. Roy got it into his head that I was careless with spending. I wasn't. I was meticulous. I tracked every dollar in a little notebook I kept in my purse because that's how my mother had taught me, and before that her mother had taught her, and they had both lived through times when you had to know where every dollar went or you went without. But Roy would look at the Visa statement and his eyes would go straight to any amount over $20 and he'd say, "What's this?" And I'd have to explain. New winter boots for our daughter because she had outgrown hers. A birthday gift for his own mother. Replacement windshield wipers. Cough medicine. "I earn the real money in this house," he said to me once back when the kids were teenagers. At the time I was making $38,000 a year and he was making 62. I remember the number because I thought about it for days afterward. I thought, I pay the hydro bill, the phone bill, and our son's hockey registration out of my salary. I buy every piece of food that enters this house. I bought both kids their winter coats last month. What he means by real money is more money than you. And I suppose by that math he was right, but the math was missing a lot of rows. I never said any of this out loud. I thought it. I went for long walks along the river and I thought it. And then I came home and made dinner. By the time we were in our 50s, the kids were grown. Our daughter was living in Vancouver with her partner and our son was in Thunder Bay. I was still working. Roy had retired at 61 on a company pension. He spent his days watching the news, doing Sudoku, and tinkering with the car. I cooked dinner every night. I did the grocery shopping. I cleaned the bathrooms. I did the laundry. Roy made comments about my spending approximately once a week. Did we really need this brand of pasta sauce? The store brand is the same thing. You bought more birdseed already. We just had a bag. Is there a reason you got the fancy cream cheese? I stopped explaining. I just said yes or I don't know and moved on. What I didn't say was, the birdseed brings me joy, Roy. The cardinals at the feeder on a gray January morning are the reason I don't lose my mind. The cream cheese is 40 cents more and it tastes better and I am 63 years old and I have earned the cream cheese. The Saturday he said what he said. In November, we had just finished a conversation about a trip to see our daughter in Vancouver. She had been asking us to come for months. I wanted to go. Roy had calculated what flights would cost, 2 return tickets from Regina to Vancouver, and announced that it was a waste of money. "You go if you want," he said. "You pay for your own ticket and I'll stay here, but I'm not spending $900 to sit in a metal tube for 2 hours." I see Lake as a joke. She hit her head on a rock and nearly daughter into Joker. That it had been almost a year. He said, "You've been bleeding this family dry for 41 years. From now on, every penny you spend comes from your own money." And I said, "Okay." He went back to his Sudoku. I sat at the kitchen table for a while after he left the room. I looked at the bird feeder outside the window. There was a pair of chickadees on it. Then I got up, went to the little desk in the corner of the spare bedroom where I kept my laptop and my notebooks, and I sat down. I opened a new spreadsheet, and I started to think. I am an accountant. I've been an accountant for 38 years. Numbers are not mysterious to me. I know how to document a transaction. I know how to calculate a value. I know how to build a case out of data. I had never turned those skills on my own marriage before, but Roy had just handed me a premise. From now on, we each pay our own way. So I thought, all right, let's go back to the beginning and see what that would have looked like. I started with what I could remember and document. I still had old notebooks going back 15 years. I had email receipts going back 12. I had a decent memory for round numbers and a professional habit of keeping records. It took me the better part of 3 weekends to build what I started thinking of privately as the ledger. The ledger was not a revenge document. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't designed to win an argument. It was just a record, an honest accounting of what I had contributed to this household over 41 years, denominated in dollars where I could calculate it, noted in time where I couldn't. I calculated the grocery spending. I had done approximately 85% of all grocery shopping over 41 years. Based on our spending patterns and what I could reconstruct, I estimated my labor contribution, driving to the store, shopping, carrying bags, unpacking, at somewhere between 4 and 5 hours per week for most of those years. I noted this. I calculated the cooking. 7 nights a week, 41 years, minus perhaps 200 nights when Roy had cooked or we'd ordered in. I am conservative by nature. I used low estimates. I looked up what personal chef services cost in Saskatchewan, which is not Vancouver pricing. I used that as a reference. I calculated the childcare management. Not the loving part. You can't put a number on that, and I wouldn't try. But the administrative hours, the scheduling, the ferrying, the shopping for school supplies and sports equipment, the coordination with teachers and coaches and doctors. I calculated the house cleaning over 4 decades, the laundry, the organizing, the maintenance scheduling, calling the plumber, booking the furnace inspection, arranging the Evistro cleaning every spring. Roy had never called a tradesperson in his life. He didn't know our plumber's name. I had been calling that plumber for 30 years. I calculated what I had spent on gifts for Roy's family over 41 years. Christmas presents for his parents, his sister, her kids, later her grandkids. Birthday presents, wedding gifts, sympathy flowers when his father died. I had paid for all of it because if I hadn't, it wouldn't have happened. Roy's family would have received nothing from us for 4 decades, and they never would have known why. I did not calculate everything. I didn't calculate the years I handled our son's asthma, the pharmacy runs at midnight, the nebulizer cleanings, the school permission forms that meant he could have his inhaler in class. I didn't calculate the summer I essentially ran a household while also working full-time, while Roy recovered from knee surgery. I didn't calculate the times I had stayed late at work and still come home to cook dinner at 7:30, because Roy didn't think to start anything. I left those out. I used only what I could attach a number to. The total, even conservatively calculated, was not a small number. I printed the spreadsheet. I put it in a folder and I put the folder in my desk drawer and I left it there. Meanwhile, I had said okay, so I started living like we had agreed. The Monday after Roy made his declaration, I went to the grocery store and I bought groceries for myself. Not for both of us. For me. I bought the cream cheese I liked, a small block of old cheddar, some chicken thighs, a bag of clementines, yogurt, a good loaf of bread from the bakery section. I did not buy Roy's yogurt, which is a different brand from mine. I did not buy the bulk peanut butter he likes, or the particular brand of orange juice he has every morning. or the frozen dinners he prefers for lunch when I'm at work. I put my groceries in a section of the fridge I mentally designated as mine, and I left the rest of the fridge as it was. That night, I made myself chicken thighs with a roasted sweet potato and a salad. I set one place at the table, mine. I sat down and I ate my dinner and I read my book. Roy came into the kitchen around 6:30 and opened the fridge. He stood there for a while. Then he said, "What's for dinner?" I see Lake as a joke. She hit her head on a rock and nearly drowned. She finked the miramis. He found the leftover pasta from Sunday, heated it up, and ate it at the kitchen table while I read at the other end. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. Tuesday, I made myself soup from scratch, a big pot of chicken and vegetable that would last me most of the week. I put it in a container with my name on it on my shelf in the fridge. This is what I had in the fridge now, my shelf. I'd never had my own shelf before. Wednesday, Roy asked me what we were having for dinner. I said, "I'm having soup. I'm not sure what you're having." He made himself a grilled cheese sandwich. He burned it slightly and the smoke alarm went off. I waved a dish towel at it and said nothing. Thursday, he asked if I was going to the grocery store. I said I had already been and I had what I needed. He said, "We're out of orange juice." I said, "Your orange juice, yes." He looked at me for a long moment. I looked back. He got in his car and drove to the co-op and bought his own orange juice. The weeks went on like this. I won't pretend it was comfortable. Living in a house with a person you've been married to for 41 years and suddenly operating as two separate households under one roof is a strange experience. There were moments in those first weeks that felt almost funny to me. The two small containers in the fridge, each one labeled, the careful navigation of the kitchen on evenings when we were both cooking. There were other moments when it just felt sad. Very sad, but Roy had made a declaration and I had said okay and I was going to see it through. I bought myself a new bird feeder for the backyard, a nicer one with a larger seed tray that the downy woodpecker could use, from my own money. I enjoyed that purchase enormously. Roy noticed. "New bird feeder," he said. "Yes," I said. "What did that cost?" "It's from my own money," I said. "You said everything I spend comes from my own money." He didn't answer. I booked my flight to Vancouver, return, non-stop Regina to Vancouver. I paid for it myself. It cost me $462 and I did not feel guilty for 1 second. I was in Vancouver for 5 days. My daughter and I walked along the seawall and ate soup dumplings in Richmond and drove up to Squamish for a day to look at the mountains. She knew something was wrong at home. She's perceptive, my daughter. She didn't push. On the third evening, over a bottle of wine on her balcony, she said quietly, "Mum, what's going on with you and Dad?" I told her, not everything, but enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long has this been happening?" I see Lake as a joke. She hit her head on a rock and nearly doke. She hit her head on a rock and nearly desperation from the shudder. She put her hand over mine. She said, "What are you going to do?" I see Lake as in Tom, not sure yet, but I have a spreadsheet. She laughed, which made me laugh, which made both of us cry a little. We sat out there until it got cold. I came home on a Sunday. Roy picked me up from the airport, which I had not asked him to do. He had tracked my flight on his phone. When I got in the car, he said, "Good trip." And I said yes. We drove home on the highway in the November dark, and he didn't say much. But something had shifted, I thought. I couldn't have told you exactly what. He was quieter. He was watching me a little differently. A week after I got back, Roy's brother came through town on his way to Moose Jaw. He always stayed with us when he passed through, which happened 2 or 3 times a year. And he always expected a proper home-cooked meal, and I had always provided one. Roast chicken, usually. Something that filled the house with a good smell. His brother arrived around 5 o'clock. I was reading in the living room. Roy showed him in. His brother came into the living room and said, "What's for dinner?" "It doesn't smell like anything." I see Lake as a joke. She hit her head on a rock and nearly drowned. His brother looked at Roy. Roy looked at me. I looked back at Roy and waited. Roy said to his brother, "We'll order something in, I guess." His brother said, "Order in? You always have a proper meal." Roy said, "Things are a little different right now." His brother sat down and looked between us and said, "Everything all right?" Roy said, "Fine." They ordered pizza. I ate my pasta. His brother kept glancing at me across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between confused and thoughtful. After dinner, Roy went to watch the game and his brother helped me carry plates to the kitchen. He stood there with a stack of plates and said, "Did he do something?" I said, "He told me I'd been draining this family for 41 years and from now on I had to pay for everything myself." His brother put the plates down. He said, "He said that to you?" I said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He doesn't have any idea, does he?" I said, "I have a spreadsheet actually in my desk." He said, "Show me." I went and got the folder. I spread the pages out on the kitchen table. His brother stood there and read it. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "This is everything you've put in, over 41 years. I see Lake as a joke. She hit her head or mock and nearly died." He kept reading. Then he said very quietly, "You should show him this." I see Lake as a joke. She hit her mock and nearly go. He said, "I'll talk to him." I said, "You don't have to." He said, "He's my brother and he's being an idiot, and yes, I do." I don't know exactly what was said between them that evening. I went to bed early and left them to it. I heard the low sound of their voices in the living room for a couple of hours. At one point the tone rose and then fell again. Roy's brother left the next morning before I was up. Roy was quiet all that day. He sat in the kitchen with his coffee for a long time after I got up. He didn't do a Sudoku. He was just sitting. Around noon he said, "Can I see the spreadsheet?" I went and got the folder. I put it on the table in front of him. He opened it and looked at the first page for a long time. He turned to the second page, the third. There were 9 pages. I made myself tea and I stood at the counter with it and I waited. He got to the last page. He closed the folder. He sat with his hands flat on top of it and stared at the table. Then he said, without looking up, "I didn't know it was this much." I said, "I know." He said, "I seed something terrible to you." I seed, "You've been saying versions of it for a long time." He looked up then. His eyes were red. "Roy is not a man who cries easily." He said, "I think I've been saying versions of it for a long time." I said, "Yes." He said, "I don't know why." I sat down across from him. I said, "I think you grew up watching your mother do everything and your father take it for granted, and I think it just seemed normal to you. I don't think you sat down one day and decided to be unfair. I think you just never looked at it." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I'm looking at it now." I can see that. Outside the window, a red-breasted nuthatch had found the new feeder. I watched it for a moment, hanging upside down the way nuthatches do, working at the seeds with great seriousness and purpose. Roy said, "I'm sorry." And then he said it again, "I'm really sorry, Gwen." There was more to it than that. There are always more conversations, more months of it, more moments when old habits surface and have to be pointed out, gently or not so gently. We went to see a counselor in the new year, a woman who specialized in couples over 60 and was very direct, which suited us both. Roy had a couple of sessions alone with her too. Things are not perfectly different. I won't pretend they are. But the shared grocery list came back. The cooking rotates now. He makes dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and on Sundays we cook together, which is sometimes irritating and sometimes actually nice. He looked up what house cleaning services charge per hour and made a noise like someone had hit him in the chest. He came and found me to tell me. He said, "I looked up cleaning rates." I said, "And?" He said, "We owe you a lot of money." I said, "You don't owe me money. You just owe me the respect of understanding what I've been doing." He's been quieter about spending since then, not in the watching me way, the surveillance way, just quieter in general. Last month he said, without my asking, "I'm going to Sobeys, do you need anything?" And when he came back, he had bought my cream cheese without being told, the 400-gram block of the kind I like. I didn't make a thing of it. I just said thank you and put it in the fridge. My fridge now, our fridge, same fridge. Our daughter came home for Christmas. She and Roy had a long talk, just the two of them, on Christmas Eve. I don't know everything that was said. I know that when they came back into the kitchen where I was making the shortbread she always liked as a kid, my daughter came over and put her arms around me from behind and said into my shoulder, "You've always held this family together, Mum." I kept cutting the shortbread into stars. I said, "Well, I had a good spreadsheet." She laughed. Roy, who was standing in the doorway, smiled a little too, a tired smile, the kind that knows something. I put the tray in the oven and set the timer and wiped my hands on my apron and thought, 41 years. It took 41 years to get here. But we're here. The nuthatch was back at the feeder the next morning, Christmas morning, hanging upside down in the cold. I watched it from the kitchen window while the coffee brewed. Roy came downstairs and stood beside me at the window, and we watched it together without saying anything. The two of us in the kitchen that has been mine for 4 decades, in the house that I have held together with my hands. I've thought a lot about that November morning. Not with bitterness, not anymore. More the way you think about a corner you turned without realizing it. How the whole direction of things shifted because of one ugly sentence said over coffee. Roy wasn't a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He was a man who had never been asked to look. And when no one asks you to look, it's remarkably easy not to. The work I did was invisible not because I hid it, but because invisible work has a way of erasing itself the moment it's done. The meal is eaten, the appointment is kept. The child arrives at school with the right forms in his backpack. It disappears into the ordinary functioning of a life, and the person who didn't do it never has to notice the gap. What Roy's declaration did, and I don't think he intended this, was force both of us to see the gap. When I stopped filling it, it became visible. That's all the spreadsheet really was, a way of making visible what had always been there. I think about what it took to get to that point. Not the anger, though there was anger, buried down deep where I'd put it years ago. I mean the steadiness it took to not explode, to not hand him a list of grievances at the kitchen table the way I had wanted to, more than once over the years. There's something to be said for that kind of self-possession. Knowing when the moment isn't right, holding what you know until the time comes to use it clearly. That's not weakness. I used to wonder if it was. I don't anymore. And the intelligence of it. Because I think it was intelligent to respond to an accusation with evidence rather than emotion. I am an accountant. I know what a documented case looks like. I knew that if I ever wanted Roy to genuinely understand, I couldn't just tell him. I had to show him in a language he could not dismiss. Numbers don't cry. Numbers don't get called dramatic. Numbers just sit there on the page and say, "Here is what happened." The courage part was quieter. It was the part where I kept going to work every day and making my own dinner and labeling my shelf in the fridge and not apologizing for any of it. It was booking the flight to Vancouver and sitting on my daughter's balcony and saying out loud to another person what had been happening. That was harder than the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet I could do alone in a quiet room. The talking out loud took something else. What I know now, at 63, sitting in the kitchen where I have cooked 10,000 meals, is that the things we carry in a marriage don't disappear when they go unacknowledged. They accumulate. They sit in the low places. And eventually, one way or another, the accounting comes due. Roy stood beside me on Christmas morning and watched the nuthatch on the new feeder I bought with my own money. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. But he was there, and he was paying attention, and after 41 years that felt like something worth standing still for,